Doom didn't start off as a masterpiece. It became one through trial, error, and 5 fascinating prototypes. Over the course of just 18 months, the game evolved rapidly through builds full of strange weapons, scrapped mechanics, and some interesting level design. In this deep dive, I'll be going through each prototype, pausing along the way to explore how key elements, such as enemies, weapons, and levels, all took shape. So buckle up as we go back to where Doom began. So let's kick things off with Doom 0.2. It's more of a tech demo than a game, but it shows just where Doom was after only 2 months of development. At this stage, the game went by Doom Evil Unleashed. There's a certain charm to this subtitle, but I can see why it was dropped. Jumping into the game, the heads-up display immediately stands out. It's a bit ugly and takes up way too much of the screen. It shows your current weapon, vitals and stats, a mini-map, your weapon selection, and some weird placeholder text at the bottom. I mean, seriously, what the f is this? At this stage, nothing really works yet, but having the HUD laid out like some kind of tactical visor interface is a pretty cool idea. Anyway, let's take a look at the enemies. We're only 2 months into development, and the imp is already surprisingly close to its final form. The only real difference is in the face, likely a result of the prototype using a slightly different color palette. It's corrected in the next version, but honestly, I kinda like it this way. It's pretty scary. The map also features some Barons of Hell, who are also almost identical to how they appear in the final game. But there's also a Pinky, and this one does stand out. Why not see if you can spot the differences? All of the enemies are static, but credit where it's due. Considering how early they are, these sprites are surprisingly solid. And as for weapons, well, there's only one, the shotgun. It already feels nice and chunky, even if the look isn't quite there yet. Digging into the game's files, we'll find a set of weapon icons that hint at what was planned at this stage of development. Let's break them down real quick. The pistol and shotgun both made it into the final game. The machine gun became the chain gun. The missile launcher became the rocket launcher. And the BFG 2704 would be renamed the BFG 9000. These weapons didn't make the cut, but are described in the Doom Bible. The knife was planned to be attached to the pistol, but it was never implemented, and it became the fists in the final game. The projectile did minimal damage, but gave a readout on the enemy. This is its only appearance in the prototypes. The spray rifle was to be as powerful as the shotgun, but with a wider spread. It also makes its only appearance in this build. The Unmaker was never implemented, but a version of it does show up in later Doom games. And the Dark Claw was to be a demon weapon that would cast a dark cloud of tortured essence. Whatever that means. It was never fully implemented, but stayed around for quite some time. Its pickup sprite was updated in 0.4, before being dropped in favour of the plasma rifle. The engine is bare bones, but functional enough to let the devs test maps, lighting, and assets. And there's a set of debug hotkeys that let you mess with the visuals. 3 and 4 scroll through wall textures, including the peculiar message, "Jules sucks." 5 and 6 scroll through ceiling textures, 7 and 8 through floor textures, one of which says, "Tom is king." And 9 and 0 adjust the scene brightness. Spooky. In regards to those textures, Tom refers to Tom Hall, who initially served as creative director on the project. He wrote the original Doom Bible, which was a detailed design document outlining the game's story, characters, and structure. But as development progressed, tensions rose within the team. Tom Hall's narrative-driven vision didn't quite mesh with the fast gameplay-first approach the rest of the team wanted. He would eventually leave the company before Doom's release. So these little texture messages land less like playful in-jokes and more like quiet reminders of a team starting to drift apart. So that's Doom 0.2. It's barely a game, but already showing some strong foundations. The tone, the look, and feel of Doom are already starting to take shape. The next build would bring it closer to life, adding more weapons, more monsters, and more intricate level design. The 0.3 build is dated just 24 days after 0.2. But even in that short space of time, a lot of new content was added. For example, the title screen now features a simple animation. The level selection has expanded, but 5 out of the 9 levels are just the same empty test map. So let's skip those and focus on the other 4, all of which are early versions of maps that made it into the final game. Let's jump in and take a look. Level 1 starts us off playing cards with 3 other Marines. This idea is taken directly from an early draft of the story, as seen in the Doom Bible. This is the first time we see the Marine sprite, and aside from a few minor tweaks, it's already more or less final. We've also got this floating around in the files. What is up with those eyes? But the file name makes it clear this was just a placeholder for the possessed humans. Speaking of enemies, everyone from 0.2 returns. They're static and unkillable just like before, but digging through the files reveals a new enemy, an alpha version of the Lost Soul. Its early design is completely different. Which version do you prefer? The weapons are still not fully functional, but we do at least get a few more. We now have a rifle, and a bayonet for when we run out of ammo. The machine gun makes its first appearance, and the shotgun returns with some very minor changes. And interestingly, this build shows signs of a crouch mechanic. Pressing M lowers the player to floor level, which isn't quite low enough to pick up these items, but it's still a cool glimpse at something that didn't make the cut. And I'm sure you've all noticed by now that the heads-up display from 0.2 is back. But this time, it actually does something. The minimap works, and while glitchy, the weapon select can even be changed. They've also added a second heads-up display. This one is much more minimalist and closer to what we'd see in the final. The biggest leap forward with 0.3 has to be the level design. The 4 playable stages all correspond to maps in the final game, and while rough, many areas are instantly recognizable. Level 1 ends up as spawning vats. The layout has a long way to go, but the foundations are already in place. Level 2 is an early version of Containment Area. This level is probably most well remembered for the room full of storage crates, and is instantly recognizable even as far back as 0.3. Level 3 is a rough take on the refinery, though it's not immediately obvious. The outdoor areas are missing and the textures are completely different, but the core layout is already there. And then there's Level 8, an early version of Nuclear Plant. This is probably the most recognizable level from 0.3. The outside area is completely missing, as well as the exit section after the ambush room. But despite all of the differences, this level is still instantly recognizable. And finally, we have a couple of unused maps. They are very simple and don't seem to resemble anything from the final game, but they seem to be early implementations of concepts from the Doom Bible. The first is called The Store. It's just a small room with a few desks, likely meant to represent shop counters. The idea of shops in Doom is pretty crazy. Then there's Shaun 2, which features this room. The rest of the level is pretty forgettable, but this gives us a glimpse at how enemy placement was being tested. So that's Doom 0.3. Still nowhere near ready to ship, but definitely inching closer. It introduced a surprising amount of content for just 3 weeks progress. Most levels are still flat and boxy, with little variation in floor or ceiling height, but the groundwork is clearly being laid, and the next build is a solid step forward. The 0.4 build is dated just over 1 month after 0.3, and while it might not look drastically different at first, there are some key upgrades that push the game a lot closer to its final form. For starters, it's clear that the engine has improved, doors have been added, and levels have been updated to include more variation in height. Some areas are lowered, others raised, giving the levels a more natural feel. You'll also spot flashing lights in some areas, which is another small but important step toward a more finished look. There's also a new heads-up display. There's only one this time, and it's one we haven't seen before. It's clearly the next step towards the final design. But with the old heads-up display gone, this build is now missing a minimap entirely. And speaking of things that are strangely missing from this build, the selection of weapons is actually smaller than in 0.3. We're down to just 2, the rifle and the bayonet. But digging through the files reveals sprites for a new weapon, the chainsaw, which looks slightly different to how it does in the final. But as with the last version, I think the biggest improvements are with the maps themselves. All of the levels from 0.3 return here, and there are some significant updates. Several other levels have also been added. Let's take a closer look. Level 1 is a revised version of spawning vats, and looking at the map, it's clear that a lot of work has gone into it. New areas have been added and existing ones updated. Stairs are more abundant than in 0.3, especially in the new sections. It really feels like the devs were trying to showcase that new vertical gameplay. That said, there's still a lot of work ahead before it reaches its final form. The Marines poker game has been given a huge upgrade. They now have a bigger table and some chairs to sit on. I can't help but find it funny that in the Doom Bible, Tom Hall considered these chairs as vital to the game's completion. Overall, the level is still quite rough, but it feels a lot more interesting with the added height variation. Another big improvement is with the texturing. Take this area, for example. It already looks way better than it did in 0.3, and all they've really changed are the wall textures. Levels 2 and 3 have only seen minimal changes, the most notable being the new room in the upper right corner of level 2. Nuclear Plant has had a few upgrades. The room that houses an imp and a shotgun in the final game has been added, though the elevator is still missing. The red keycard area is here too, but there's still no outdoor section. The ambush room has been expanded as well, but instead of leading to the exit, it now loops back to an earlier part of the level. Now let's take a look at the maps that were new to this build. Level 4 is an early version of Computer Station. It still has a long way to go, but the overall structure is already in place, and many of the rooms are instantly recognizable. Level 5 later becomes Central Processing. Like the last one, it's familiar, but there's no clear route through the level. It's very open-ended, with areas that are rough sketches of the final layout. Level 7 is where things get interesting. This one eventually becomes Command Control, but it seems to draw from concepts in the Doom Bible. The document describes features that appear here, most notably a locker room and shower area, both included in this version of the map, but ultimately cut from the game. Level 9 became Pandemonium. The basic layout is very close, but the textures and lighting are so different that it gives the map an entirely different feel. There are also a couple of levels that go unused. Level 10 is a very small map. It's unclear if it ever evolved into something else, or if it was just abandoned early on. And Level 11, which is a much larger map, but with no obvious counterpart, it also remains a bit of a mystery. So that's Doom 0.4. The levels are under heavy development, but they're starting to take shape, with several layouts already resembling what we'd see in the final. Sure, they're missing detail, texture polish, and any real gameplay, but it's progress. The next build is when things really start to come together. By the time we hit version 0.5, Doom is starting to feel like an actual game. Not a finished one, but at least now there's some gameplay. First of all, pickups actually work now and are reflected in the heads-up display. You've also got a working health system, meaning that you can take damage. And yes, you can finally die. It's a big milestone. The minimap is back, and now it's bound to a key like in the final game. It opens in full screen rather than being embedded in the heads-up display. The graphics aren't final, but the functionality's there. There's also an early version of the menu, and it's already looking pretty close to final. You can even select a difficulty in this build, though easy mode isn't called I'm too young to die. Here it's called I just want to kill. Fair enough. And finally, we get some much needed combat. Well, sort of. Enemies can now be shot, and they disappear. I didn't say it was fun. So there's still no AI, but after so many builds with no interaction, I'll take it. We're still seeing the same old monsters in the levels, but behind the scenes, the enemy roster is filling out. Possessed humans and Keiko demons make their debut, with sprites that, aside from a few minor tweaks, are already essentially final. Lost Souls, on the other hand, are completely gone. Their placeholder sprites from earlier builds have been entirely stripped from the files. The Pinky remains mostly unchanged, but this build does include a unique death animation not seen in any other version. Whether it was meant to be the standard death or a jib animation isn't clear. But either way, it's a cool little anomaly. The rifle and machine gun were updated one last time, with new sprites. This is the final build where they appear, before being replaced by the pistol and chain gun. The bayonet also makes its last appearance here, though visually it's unchanged from the previous build. Level intermission screens are introduced. The art is clearly placeholder, so I won't mock the visuals. What's interesting, though, is that they still follow the structure laid out in the Doom Bible. 6 episodes, each with 13 maps, totaling a whopping 78 levels. Ambitious, to say the least. By the time Doom actually shipped, the number was cut down to 27. Still a solid amount of levels, and way more manageable if they ever wanted to finish the game. The levels presented here in this build are still in flux. Some are coming together quite nicely, with working keycards, locked doors, and a proper sense of progression. Others aren't quite as far along. Let's take a closer look. Level 1 is a unique map that only appears in this build. It's very straightforward and isn't particularly interesting. It's unclear whether it was meant to be the game's starting map or simply created for demo purposes. Level 2, Containment Area, has had a lot of work done to the lower half of the map. New switches, elevators, and other distinct landmarks have been added. The exit's in a different spot when compared to the final game, and currently inaccessible, so the level can't be completed in this build. Level 3 is once again the refinery. Aside from some texturing, the map is now almost identical to the final version. Level 6 is actually an early version of Doom 2's refueling base, originally designed by Tom Hall and later finished by Sandy Peterson. It's not unusual for scrapped content to be reused, but what's surprising is how closely this version matches the final. The layout is nearly identical, yet thanks to the textures and lighting, it gives off a completely different vibe. Level 7 is Command Control, and it's been updated since 0.4. The locker rooms that we saw earlier have been removed, and the map now looks a lot closer to the final. Version 0.5 was the last prototype before Tom Hall's departure. So I wonder, could this be the point where Romero began shifting the design away from Hall's original vision? Level 10 is the first appearance of Toxin Refinery. The blue keycard area is completely different here and, unsurprisingly, was made a lot more interesting in the final version. The opposite side of the map, where the exit would eventually go, hasn't been finished yet, so the level can't be completed. The secret area is already in place though, and it'll trap you if you're not careful. Spawning vats is now placed at level 11, so it's no longer the starting map. Possibly another sign of the shift away from the Doom Bible. For now, the layout and progression remain mostly intact, but both the starting point and exit will eventually be moved. Now, I'm sorry, but I have some bad news. This is unfortunately the last time we'll be playing blackjack with our marine friends. And it gets worse. Some inconsiderate asshole deleted the chairs. And finally, we have map 12, which is an early version of Phobos Anomaly. The only part that really carries over to the final design is the starting area. The star-shaped room is entirely missing, and so is the dramatic transformation at the end of the level. So that's Doom 0.5, a clear leap forward in engine progress and level design. The game's still in alpha, rough around the edges, and 6 months away from release, but the core is finally in place. This was the last build touched by Tom Hall. The next one moves on without him, and we'll start to see what Doom looks like without the Doom Bible. So this is it, the last prototype before Doom would hit store shelves. Dated October 4th, 1993, this was the version sent to the press, and it's a major leap forward from 0.5. We finally have enemy AI, which alone makes the game feel truly playable for the first time. Not just technically complete, but actually fun. You can finally fall off ledges too. Up to now, Doom's movement had been strangely restrictive, as if the game world was lined with invisible rails. The heads-up display is nearly finalized, featuring Doom Guy's face, and most of the familiar layout. But instead of an arms section tracking weapons, there's an item counter tallying collectible relics, like demonic daggers and unholy Bibles, which are leftovers from the Doom Bible. Collect 50 of these or pick up a soul sphere and you will be awarded an extra life. The game also has a point system and keeps score for kills and items. All this ties into the extra life system displayed next to Doom Guy's face. But it doesn't work yet. You can gain lives, but dying doesn't reduce the count. In-game messages are displayed in a window that pops up right over the heads-up display, blocking important information. It's cluttered and awkward, which is why the final game moved messages to the top of the screen. There's also an unused messaging system. Pressing enter opens a chat box for sending messages to other players. Pretty neat. Weapons are now mostly complete, but there are still a few interesting differences. The chain gun has been introduced, but it looks a bit different from the final version. The rocket launcher now recoils after each shot, slowing its fire rate, and its knockback is weaker than in the final game. The plasma rifle is here too, and fires different coloured projectiles when compared to the final. Then there's the BFG. This thing is wild. Instead of firing the classic invisible tracers, it sprays out a swarm of bouncing projectiles. It's probably not as effective as the final, but it's pretty fun. Enemies have seen some updates too. While I couldn't spot him in any levels, the shotgun guy's sprites are now in the game's files. And the prototype Lost Souls that were cut in 0.4 have returned, and this time they're actually placed in the levels. If you thought they were a pain in the final game, just wait till you meet these guys. They use a hit scan attack instead of the familiar charging headbutt. And there's still no sign of specters or any of the bosses in this build. One notable difference is that doors and elevators bounce off enemies instead of pushing through them, which sounds like it adds depth until you get trapped in a room. Lifts also move more slowly here and were sped up considerably in the final. As for the levels, there are only 3. Level 1 is Nuclear Plant, which has some cool minor layout differences, but is mostly there. Most notably, the section just before the ambush room now forces you to take damage on the nukage. It's pretty clumsy and would be cleaned up soon after. On the way to the first keycard area, you'll spot elevators on either side. The level originally had a walkway here in 0.4, then switched to elevators for this build, before changing to stairs in the final game. It's a neat glimpse into the development process and the testing of different ideas. Outside areas have also been added now, featuring a really cool beta skyline. Then there's Level 2, Unholy Cathedral. This is the first time we're seeing it in any prototype, and it's pretty much finished already and shows no major differences from the retail version. And Level 3 is Containment Area, one of the oldest maps in the game. The main changes here are cosmetic, especially in these areas, but otherwise it's mostly locked in. Oh, and some of you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned any of the music or sound effects. Well, it's because there aren't any. Unfortunately, none of the prototypes we've looked at today have any sound whatsoever, which is a shame because I'd love to have heard how some of those iconic sound effects and music tracks evolved over time. The press release prototype is Doom on the brink of completion, but it's not without a few rough edges. Within weeks, most of these leftovers would be ironed out, polished up, or cut entirely. Sent to the press in November 1993, this prototype gave journalists their first real taste of Doom. The levels, weapons, and enemies are nearly complete, but subtle differences remain. All it needs is a final coat of polish. And this marks the end of the Doom prototyping era. Looking back, it's been one hell of a journey. From 0.2, a skeletal tech demo barely holding together, all the way to the press release, which finally feels like a real game. We've watched Doom evolve from crude beginnings and into something with purpose. Sprawling maps, refined mechanics, and a team zeroing in on their final vision. But what I find most fascinating is what could have been. Any stray idea from the Doom Bible, had it made it in, might have changed everything. One detour, and who knows, maybe Doom wouldn't have hit the same. But it did. In these moments, Doom wasn't just being built, it was becoming a masterpiece.